Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sociology 399, Fear and Social Anxieties. I am Dr. Dilsora Fozilova, and in today's lecture, we will explore the pervasive fear experienced under totalitarian regimes. This is our third week's first class, and I am very happy to be with you today, so welcome. So what is totalitarianism? Totalitarianism is characterized by absolute control over all aspects of social life, where the state employs fear as a tool to manipulate and dominate its citizens. In today's lecture, our focus will be on understanding how fear is not merely a byproduct, but a central mechanism through which totalitarian regimes maintain their power and suppress dissent. Hannah Arendt, one of the political theorists, she was born in Germany and lived in America. We will talk about that in a bit. Her profound analysis in the origins of totalitarianism, that's her one of the famous books, provides a crucial lens for examining these dynamics. Arendt illustrates how totalitarian leaders such as Stalin in the Soviet Union and Hitler in the Nazi Germany systematically utilized fear to dismantle social structures and instill a sense of powerlessness among the populace. Through relentless propaganda, arbitrary violence, and the obliteration of personal freedoms, this regime fostered an environment where fear permeated every aspect of daily lives. In our last classes, we called it culture of fear, right? This constant fear served to isolate individuals, making collective resistance nearly impossible and ensuring the regime's unchallenged dominance. Hannah Arendt calls it masses of atomized individuals. So people could not connect or trust one another under totalitarian regimes. Today's lecture will delve into specific historical moments, specific historical examples to illustrate how fear was cultivated and weaponized by totalitarian states. We will discuss the mechanisms of surveillance, the role of secret police, and the use of public trials and purges to create a climate of terror. By understanding the psychological and social impacts of this pervasive fear, we can better comprehend the resilience and strategies required to resist such regimes. So we don't have that happening in our society again. Ultimately, Arendt's work reminds us of the vital importance of safeguarding democratic institutions and civil liberties to prevent the rise of totalitarianism. So I will share my slides now, and then we will dig into this topic, and I hope you really enjoy today's class. So today's lecture is called Social Conditions Under Total Control. So what social conditions we are thinking about? The fear experienced in society because of the certain mechanisms ruled the society, or certain elements of totalitarianism that created fear culture in society. We are going to review the last week's class. We are not going to review that, but we just kind of connect two things today: Stalinist Soviet Union and totalitarianism. Why we started with Stalinist Soviet Russia, and today we are talking about totalitarianism. We will be discussing reading Arendt. We will be talking about the origins of totalitarianism. We will try to understand what is totalitarianism and what is totalitarian control. By doing so, we will be conceptualizing fear in society under total control. So what did we study in our last class? So the rise of totalitarianism in the 19th century, according to Hannah Arendt, was a unique event because this kind of governments was never experienced by human society before. What is so unique about them? The totalitarian regime created in these two countries, Stalin's Soviet Union and the Nazi Germany, was never happened in the past. Elements of totalitarianism, though, always exist in societies. For example, we can see that in certain authoritarian states that they use the elements of totalitarianism, but it's not fully totalitarian control. Now we will try to understand today what is actual totalitarian control and what kind of measures we need to consider to call one state a totalitarian. So according to Hannah Arendt, Stalinism, Bolshevism in the Soviet Union, and Nazism in Germany, both of them are totalitarian regimes. There are not particular causes for these totalitarian regimes, she says. It can just rise because of this charismatic leader and all the elements or all the measures used by these leaders. So who is Hannah Arendt? Hannah Arendt was born in the secular family of German Jewish in London in 1906. Hannah Arendt went to University of Marburg and meets philosopher Martin Heidegger, and that is itself a very important story. At some point, I might talk about that. Hannah Arendt completed her PhD in 1929, and that was under Karl Jaspers, philosopher psychologist Karl Jaspers. In the 1930s, Hannah Arendt had to leave the country because that the movement, totalitarian movement, started in Germany. So at the time, all Jewish people tried to leave Germany to save their lives. In 1941, she immigrated to USA and settled in New York. Arendt dies in 1975. It's not too long ago because of heart attack. And then in between, she was like stateless person, and then she lived all different kinds of lives. And then Hannah Arendt's books kind of reflects her life, her understandings of what was going on in Germany. And she has a very clear lens in looking at this, what was happening in Germany at that time or in Europe at that time. The Heidegger thing I just mentioned, that she falls in love with this professor. That is Martin Heidegger, and he was already married at that time. But she deeply saddened to see him speaking at National Socialist meetings of Nazi army. So that's why one of her books that called Men in Dark Times is the result of that feelings, deep dark feelings she felt because of Heidegger's these lectures in the National Socialist meetings of Nazi army. Her major works, I think it's very beneficial to know a little bit about Hannah Arendt. The Origins of Totalitarianism, written in 1951 or published in 1951. And then she writes all these different books. And I think if somebody reads few of them, they will understand that the Origins of Totalitarianism is the start of her thought. And all these other books kind of picked some themes from the origins of totalitarianism and expanded on it. For example, the human condition, she talks about how humans think and don't act sometimes, and sometimes they act without thinking. That the human condition is one of her major works that kind of reflects on the human behavior in totalitarian regimes. Also, she writes another book on revolution, 1963, Aikman in Jerusalem, a report on the banality of evil. In next class, we will be talking about that. Men in Dark Times, what I mentioned, that is kind of like why Heidegger was helping the Nazi Germany, the person she really much loved at that time. And then 1970, she published the book on violence. We will be talking a little bit about what violence is and power is, according to Hannah Arendt in our next class. The Life of the Mind is her another major book. So besides that, Hannah Arendt published tons of articles, and she worked in the New York Times at one point. So she was very effective scholar of her time. So the origins of totalitarianism, I'll introduce the book to start with. So the origins of totalitarianism was published in 1951, and it has three parts. The first part is called anti-Semitism. That is about like how there was a condition created for totalitarian regime to establish the development of racism, anti-Jewish kind of sentiments in Europe, and there was pogroms happening. And she tries to analyze and she tries to examine what was the reasons for that. See, she analyzes through different lenses. She looks at Jewish people as money holders, and then they were very smart and very quickly climbing in the political arena or political ladder. And they didn't have their own country. That was one of the causes of this all violence started against them, because the countries that not Jewish can do anything to push Jewish out of their countries. And the anti-Semitism actually provided tools for totalitarian movement to start against Jewish people. So the second book or second part is called Imperialism. And this is probably one of the most interesting parts of Hannah Arendt's work. This is quite thick book. So if you want to grab one of them and then read, it's a very amazing book, and your worldview probably expand immensely by reading this book. That imperialism part talks about the political expansionist climate. So how this expansion happened in Europe, and then how imperialism caused, or imperialism was one of the elements, biggest elements of totalitarian regime. And she talks about globalism, like imperialism being globally imperial nation or capitalist regime was being developed. The last part of her book is called Totalitarianism. That is pan-nationalist movements started and how totalitarianism worked in practice, and supranationalism that you probably know about. What was the main thing in the Nazi Germany? They wanted to create certain sort of nation. So to clean that blood, they had to get rid of all these different kinds of people, especially Jewish people, right? And then they were using science to kind of legitimize their goal or legitimize their purpose. It was super propaganda. And I don't know how people can fall in this kind of traps. The transformation of classes into masses. What she means by classes is we have all different kinds of groups and classes in society. And because of the totalitarian regime, that people, connection between people is destroyed. So they became masses instead of staying connected. So homelessness, rooflessness, and purposelessness became the dominant thing in society. So this is three parts of her books, and I give you just very general overview of those. And then now we are going to get into the main parts of Hannah Arendt's book that kind of gives a sense of what is the fear experience, or what kind of fear was experienced under totalitarian regime in Nazi Germany. So one of the quotes, throughout this lecture, I'll be reading some of her quotes, that so you get the taste of her writing, that it's very important to just know how she's writing. You feel like you read the book. She says in page 138, power became the essence of political action and the center of political thought when it was separated from political community which it should serve. So what she's saying here, power became the essence of political action. Actually, she's saying power should have served the political community, which are all people in the country, but it became the essence of political action and the center of political thought. So she's talking about the ideology, political ideology that should serve the community, but it became the center of political thought, or a sense of political action. She says also, Jewry, the Jewish people, was not the operative factor in the Holocaust, but merely a convenient proxy. Totalitarianism was about terror and consistency, not eradicating Jewish only. So she says, so it wasn't about Jewish people. Jewish people were just a convenient proxy. She used a very beautiful kind of imagery here. She says that was the convenient proxy, because they didn't have their states. They didn't have their own state, and that protected them. And there was anti-Semitism created long before, and some kind of a negative feeling was there already against Jewish people. So these factors were used in the Holocaust, but it was not about eradicating Jewish only, she says. So in her first part of her book, she talks about anti-Semitism, and she says it was important as it provided ideology. So what she's trying to say, anti-Semitism existed before Holocaust. The pogroms against Jewish people happened around the world in different times and parts of societies, right? So anti-Semitism was there, and then that provided ideology to Nazi Germany. So they didn't want to add this bloodline to theirs, because Jewish people are somehow bad, and anti-Semitism is some legitimacy or something that can give a base for their argument, right? She says Jewish were hated because they were the money lenders for nobility during feudalism. So they were wealthy people, and also they lended money to powerful people. And there is a paradox. Sometimes people talked about Hannah Arendt blaming Jewish people for Holocaust, that they allowed the Holocaust to happen. And then she talks about people blaming her, saying that Jewish benefited from anti-Semitism. Or she also talks about stateless, a political became allied with the nation states, which wasn't favored by the nation states. Those kind of claims against Hannah Arendt's work exists, but she does not blame Jewish people for Holocaust. But she says why Jewish leaders did not fight against what was happening at that time, why they allowed this to happen. They helped the people from authorities from Nazi Germany to organize and take these Jewish people. Why couldn't they do something about it? They knew they were going to die. Why didn't they fight against it? So that's the kind of harsh questions Hannah Arendt raises in her book. A new money bourgeoisie were on the rise. So now she's talking about Jewish people being danger for Nazi Germany. If you recall, we talked about colonialists' fear experienced by colonialists in Canada, and that was the reason behind why they suppress or why they take the children of indigenous people from their parents, why they try to keep these people under control, right? So now we can see, or in the Stalin Soviet Russia, we talked about Stalin fearing from his opponents. He didn't want to lose the power. That's why he used all different kinds of violence against the set, right? Now we are seeing same thing again. Hannah Arendt's telling us that there was a danger. The Hitler feared from Jewish people becoming another powerful political group. They were money owners already, and they were climbing on the ladder of power or political power, and that was creating fear for political leaders in Europe. To remain in power, the government in Germany limited their capitalist ambitions. That's how it starts. So, to remain in power, the government in Germany, which is, leader was Adolf Hitler, limited their capitalist ambitions. There was rules and regulations against Jewish people doing business in Germany, that Jewish lawyers could not practice law. Jewish businessmen could not do their business anymore. Jewish people could not use certain services, so they became all of a sudden the most powerless people in society. So Jewish people were not hated in the individual level, she says. They were hated in the group level, like Jewish, the name Jewish was a bad thing, but in the individual level, they were friends with German people. They made marriages, or they were friends. They were visiting one another. They were close people. They worked together. They were neighbors. That was fine in the individual level. But in the group level, somehow they were not accepted and hated individuals. So there was problem with the equality of differences and the ideology of normality, that people were having problems with the propaganda created in the country. They had no choice but accepting the propaganda. She says, the birth of modern anti-Semitism has been accompanied by and interconnected with Jewish ambition, the secularization and withering away of the old religious and spiritual values of Judaism. What actually happened was that great parts of Jewish people were at the same time threatened with physical extinction from without and dissolution from within. She says she's talking about Jewish people, became a well-defined, self-preserving group within one of the classes, the aristocracy or the bourgeoisie. There's no doubt that the nation state's interest in preserving the Jewish as a special group and preventing their assimilation into class society coincided with the Jewish interest in self-preservation and group survival. So she's talking about there's two kind of ambitions. On one hand, Germany, the German leaders want them to assimilate into class society. But Jewish people, they have their own ambitions. They want to preserve their own self interests and survival. They want to exist as a culture. They have their religion. They have their people. They want to be Jewish people. They don't want to get lost in the big thing, right? In the page 37, she says the social resentment of the lower middle classes against Jewish turned it into a highly explosive political element because this bitterly hated Jewish were thought to be well on their way to the political power. So I just already mentioned that they thought Jewish people are doing so well, they have a lot of money, and they're climbing on the ladder of political power. So if they get there, that is a danger, right? So the second part of the origins of totalitarianism is imperialism. So in this part, she talks about the political theory's expansion, the political emancipation of the bourgeoisie, character of imperialism, which is race and bureaucracy, power, imperialism, race as an ideology, weapon, not nationalist and ruthlessness, master race, which is, according to Hitler, was the German, I just forgot, there was a name for it. Yeah. And then weapon for domination and savages in the modern world. Now, in 1940s, we're basically talking about how political powers were expanding across the globe, right? There was all different kinds of imperialist ambitions were observable. And you can think about the World War II being one of the biggest wars in the human history. And that was because of the imperialist ambitions in all different states in the world, right? And at that time, she's saying that race was served as one of the ideologies and the powerful ideologies and weapon for these people to get ruthless and do all kinds of ambitious works in at that time. So according to her, the Nazi Germany or Hitler viewed his nation as being a master nation. It reminds me of the creation of race, why they need it. If you remember, I mentioned about that in our other class, that that race was created for certain reasons. There was European business people was expanding in different countries. They needed three things. Number one is they needed very cheap labor. They needed raw materials to create or make stuff, and they needed markets to sell their products. So how they can get that? That was through creating race. So somehow whites were dominant, or they were higher race or master race, and they could dominate other races, which created very cheap labor or slavery. That's free labor, and that created easy way of getting their raw materials from their country, just um, grabbing their resources, right? And then making this all kinds of stuff and selling back to their markets to make money. So for that reason, race was created. Now, according to Hannah Arendt, the same ideology was used to create totalitarian regime. So there needed some type of legitimacy to start and continue this totalitarian regime. At some point, I remember she says that totalitarian regime is like a bicycle. If you are not continuing it, it will fall. It has to be constantly right, like you have to ride that bicycle to totalitarian control to continue in society. As soon as you stop that, it will fail, right? Or it will fall. She also talks about the politics is limited. Imperialism is essential to capitalism. So for capitalism to survive and flourish, according to Hannah Arendt, imperialism is very important. And now you can think about in later in today's world, we are talking about creating Western imperialism, that all this Western culture and language and everything is spread around the world, that it is just kind of another forms of imperialism, right? The same kind of imperialism in a different form needed for the expansion of capitalism in 1930s and 40s. And then another parts of her imperialism, she talked about the decline of nation state and the end of rights of man. So now we're talking about creation of the rights of man. We're talking about the universal rights, right? So that was actually the decline of nation state. Nation state was declining. Imperialism was expanding, and there was human rights of a man was in decline as well. So she makes a connection between imperialism and the rise of bourgeoisie and accumulation of power. So imperialism created imperial power over the people who had to be controlled by these people. And then she says the Hobbes laid groundwork for imperialism. So what she's talking about when she says Hobbes, we are talking about social contract. So we have to give our all our natural rights to the government to protect us, right? She kind of says like that was the number one step towards creating imperialism. Power requires a justification to kill other men. And that is one of the powerful she says in this book. So power requires a justification to kill other men. So what was the justification for Hitler to kill all these Jewish people? Just because they were Jewish, right? So anti-Semitism created that ideology for Nazi Germany. So another argument she puts there is like the imperialism is not about expansion of money. It's not about expansion of wealth or whatever. It is about expansion of power. It is not only the resources we are getting from these people. We want to control them. We want them to do what we like them to do. That's a total control over other human beings. And according to Arendt, the imperialism is about that control, expansion of that control, and expansion of that power. One of the important principles of totalitarianism, she says, is the infinite expansion of ideology and power. Infinite expansion. So it just keeps going and going. More control it takes in society, more control they want. First, they created, for example, laws or rules and regulations to limit Jewish people. Jewish lawyers could not work, Jewish engineers could not work, Jewish teachers could not work. They were jobless, right? And then they couldn't use these services, so they were controlled. The Jewish people could not go to universities, so they are creating uneducated from Jewish people. So they're just suppressing every way they can. So that is expansion of control and ideology. The implementation of mass terror by educated, intelligent, and advanced people. So she's saying that people in Nazi Germany, authorities, were not uneducated, were not stupid, and were not poor people, homeless people. They were the most educated, most intelligent, and advanced people. That's the danger about totalitarianism, right? She says, money could finally beget money because power, with complete disregard for all laws, economic as well as ethical, could appropriate wealth. And pay attention to this quote here. She says, race, in other words, was an escape into an irresponsibility where nothing human could any longer exist. So race was created for a purpose, and that was an escape into an irresponsibility. Now she's saying that creation of race justified all stupidity or irresponsibility where nothing human could any longer exist. So you can do anything inhuman, it's fine because race was justifying that. In the second part, she says, and bureaucracy was the result of a responsibility that no man can bear for his fellow men and no people for another people. It's very powerful words. I hope you just take time to read this again and kind of develop your understanding and opinion about this. She says, imperialism must be considered the first stage in the political rule of the bourgeoisie rather than the last stage of capitalism. Imperialism was the start of it, she says. Because of the imperialism, all other stages of capitalism happen. In today's world, we are talking about, actually, we will be discussing this in our next classes, how this globalization and other things created in today's world that, certain consequences of capitalism and the fears created by what they did in the first modernity. And the last part of her book is called The Origins of Totalitarianism, and that is the part of totalitarianism. So what is this about? Now she's talking about that novel form of government. Now she's saying that there was no such a thing before. There was bad governments, there was bad kingdoms, there was violence, there was all kinds of stuff happened in the history. But if we compare all of them to Nazi Germany and Stalinist Soviet Russia, there was none government was like this. This was purposefully created totalitarian regime. She said the German Nazi Party wrote the lineage to establish themselves as superior by being accepted by masses as the master race. It was easy to turn people against the Jewish. So one nation is declaring themselves as master race, and somehow another nation became some sort of race, which is you can kill them, you can abuse them, you can do anything, and that is justified by that ideology. She says high-ranking Jewish were unaware of how dire the situation was becoming and how badly they were going to suffer. That's just very powerful words. So she's saying that things were changing. The stuff was happening in society. People were, experiencing all kinds of limitations. There's propaganda, there's all kinds of oppression, but they didn't know how badly they were going to suffer, how bad the situation was. One of the most powerful tools in the totalitarian regime or totalitarian leaders use when selling their ideology is propaganda. So propaganda is one of the elements of totalitarian control. You have to have that propaganda to have totalitarian control, as it fills the void of a failed democracy. Before filling you with propaganda, they will take away your purpose, identity, and meaning to help make you susceptible. So first, you are, in the next slides, we will see you're jobless, you are disconnected from your religion, disconnected from any kinds of groups you had, you're disconnected from your family. So you're disconnected, you don't have a purpose. Now they can fill you with propaganda because the society is already disconnected and they are looking for purpose. That is a purposeful ideology of totalitarian control. She says totalitarian movements are mass organizations of atomized, isolated individuals. As I mentioned earlier, when you don't have any connections to anybody, any organization, no religion, no group, no nothing, no traditions, nothing exists. And there's no trust to anybody. Fathers are scared of their sons because sons can be very devoted to Nazi Germany or other way around. Friends can trust one another. Nobody can trust anybody. So that means people became atomized. There are masses of people in Germany, but they're not connected. They're isolated. They're atomized. They lost their purpose. Now propaganda works. Any kind of propaganda is accepted, and only purpose is helping Nazi Germany to reach or get to their goal. So that's how totalitarian regime created. She says, the truth is that the masses grow out of the fragments of highly atomized society whose competitive structure and concomitant loneliness of the individual had been held in the check only through membership in a class. The chief characteristics of the mass man is not brutality and backwardness, but his isolation and lack of normal social relationships. So there is no social relationship and there is no privacy. Every aspect of social life is surveilled by the government. And the surveillance and the creation of isolated and atomized people led to the totalitarian control in Germany. So I'm just kind of giving you an overview. That was, totalitarianism was end of rights of men. What happened was loneliness created in society, and that is ideal weapon used to help assure in a totalitarian state. Structureless mass, so they're not connected to anybody, and they become so selfless that they can give their lives for the ideology of the state. So if the Nazi Germany's, and it was, the ideology is creating only this nation, getting rid of everybody else, and that is just kind of fed to the people of Germany, and they believe in it. They can give their lives for it because there's no other purpose of living. Everything was died out. Everything was disconnected, right? The totalitarian regime, she says, it is the doing of one man, which is a totalitarian leader. She describes totalitarian leaders as being fanatic and charismatic, that when he talks, the whole nation listens. When he talks, all people are committed. That's the kind of leader totalitarian regimes require. And in the Soviet Germany, the Soviet Union too, Stalin was that kind of person. He was fanatic, charismatic, committed, and he just started something, even he knows that was not the right thing, he's committed to go until the end. And they create this fictional reality, and the society is fed by it. So they're living in the fiction. So their lives are not a real life. They are living with the propaganda. They are doing what the government says. They have no relationships. They're isolated. They are atomized. They have no purpose. They have nothing but one ideology, which is Nazism, right? So for the creation of totalitarian regime, this are the elements. You have to have all of these elements to make totalitarian regime. That's why Hannah Arendt argues that there was all kinds of bad states in the history, but totalitarian regime was a novel form of government. We already talked about that. I mean, I'm repeating myself a little bit. How does totalitarianism organize masses? And the clear definition or clear explanation she gives is the totalitarian leaders will make you unemployed, angry, isolated, disengaged in an extreme mental state before giving you something to believe. So that is the ideology of Nazism or Stalinism. Totalitarian states will dehumanize people. I mean, it says you, by taking away your spontaneity, decision making, and freedom. So you don't have privacy, you don't have your private life. So everything is open for the government to surveillance you and know. And you don't need to make any decisions. All the decisions are made by the government. You have no freedom. You have none freedom. You will just do what people or the government told you to do, and you're even scared of if you're doing the right thing. Anything, a smallest mistake can take your life away. And how they do that? The casual use of violence will be used to scare you into adhering to the ideology. For example, if somebody does something wrong, it's shot in that place, and people are scared. That is the creation of terror in society. If somebody, for example, walked in a wrong place or said something wrong or somehow kind of talk to a Jewish person or hide the Jewish child, they killed there in front of other people's eyes. So that kind of casual use of violence was used to create this totalitarian fear, totalitarian power. She says in page 315, selflessness in the sense that oneself does not matter. The feeling of being expendable was no longer the expression of individual idealism, but a mass phenomenon. So the people, she's saying, so devoted to that ideology, their lives, they feel that their lives are expendable, that they can, give their lives. And this is not like one or two people's feeling. That is the phenomena of the mass. So all people, maybe majority of people in Germany, can give their lives for this ideology. Their lives does not matter because there is a dominant ideology in the political arena, and people are totally devoted to that. That is totalitarianism. And also, she says in 382, towards the end of her book, she says the chief value, however, of the secret or conspiracy societies, organizational structure and moral standards for purposes of mass organization is in the unsurpassed capacity to establish and safeguard the fictitious world through consistent lying. So to create totalitarian regime, there has to be a total fictitious lying that continues all that time. Like we said, it's like a bicycle. So as soon as you stop this propaganda and fictitious world or lying, that bicycle will fall because people will not longer trust or believe in that kind of government. So the government has to keep imposing this lies and fictitiousness to safeguard totalitarian regime. She also says that the truth is that the masses grew out of the fragments of highly atomized society whose competitive structure and concomitant loneliness of the individual had been held in check only through membership in class. I think we read this. The chief characteristics of the mass man is not brutality and backwardness, but his isolation and lack of normal relationships. I repeated this. So to summarize this lecture, I would say we talked about the totalitarianism explained in The Origins of Totalitarianism by Hannah Arendt. We talked about anti-Semitism being one of the reasons how totalitarian regime established. Then we talked about imperialism being one of the main elements for totalitarianism to establish. She does not give us anything about why this happened. She says that this happened because of the many factors came together, and there was a highly motivated, charismatic leader came to power and used this ideology and just started this totalitarian regime. And also she gives us these elements of totalitarian regime, which is very important for the creation or establishment of totalitarian government. If I want you to take one thing from this lecture, I want you to take this quote by Hannah Arendt. She says, "The ideal subject of totalitarian rule is not the convinced Nazi or the dedicated communist, but people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction, true and false, no longer exist." So we have to encourage our awareness we have to practice thinking to don't let the totalitarian governments to happen. How we can do that? We need to make distinction between facts and fiction, true and false. In our time, we are again experiencing this kind of stuff. Like it's very hard to distinguish facts in fiction, true and false. And with the establishment of Trump government, we saw some of these elements. So this is what I want you to take from this lecture. So if you have any questions, please email me, or you can write in the discussion board, and I will be very happy to help you to find answers for that. Thank you for your attention, and I hope you do well in your this week's exam, and I hope you have a great week.